Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
For over 50 years, Burlington's legacy has been great deals on coats for all weather conditions. So before you're caught unprepared for the winter weather, head to Burlington for name brands, quality items, and surprising fits for every family member. Stock up on coats, sweaters, and accessories before the cold hits, so you can finally stop avoiding the elements and start living comfortably. Warm up at your nearest Burlington location less than 1 mile away. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow.
It is Monday, December the 9th, 2024. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, Slate's sports podcast. Back with you again, I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer at Slate, and I co-host the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. My panel and I have a fun show for you this week. First, we're going to talk about Juan Soto's move to the New York Mets. One of the darkest days in Yankees history, but wow, what a morning it must be in Queens. We will talk about the end of the most successful partnership, many would say, between a driver and team in Formula One history, as Lewis Hamilton officially ends his time at Mercedes. And we will also discuss the sensitive, inexact science of goaltender evaluation in hockey after the New York Rangers forked over the biggest contract in that position's history to their backstop, Igor Shesterkin. Big weekend for big contracts in the city of New York. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the founder and proprietor of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the day in women's sports. Lindsay, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm on a Bryce Young high. So, I don't need wins. I just need plays. I just need moxie.
Well, you're getting moxie in high supply. And your draft pick status is preserved as you see it. So you're basically living the Carolinian dream.
And we didn't trade away our draft pick this year. So that's also good news.
Must be nice. You probably forgot what that was like. And of course, we've got Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer. He co-hosts the Effectively Wild podcast, which covers the baseball world. Ben, are you taking any deferred money to do this podcast today?
Nope. Juan Soto and I are just receiving a massive signing bonus up front, but happy to be here, relieved that Soto signed shortly before we recorded instead of shortly after, and happy to be here at all because I was worried that we'd all be replaced by Timothée Chalamet, hot off his College Game Day debut. So sorry, everyone. Still us.
Yeah, Chalamet knows ball. Mm-hmm. That much is clear from watching his performance on College Game. Either he knows ball or he's got the publicist of a lifetime who had him completely prepped. I'm not sure which it is.
I think he's just listening to some really good podcasts, to prepare him for his appearances.
Yes, Bill Simmons superfan, Timothée Chalamet.
Before we get into our business, as always, we want to say thanks to our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One method of saying thanks that we like over here is a bonus episode. And this week, we will talk about the evolving world of professional sports expansion drafts in the light of a freshly conducted one in the WNBA. You can hear that episode right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking try free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. 15 years, $765 million, escalators that could make it more like $800 million. As we just discussed, no deferred salaries, so the price is the price. Juan Soto is a New York Met this morning as we wake up. I wrote a whole big preamble script for a related baseball topic we were going to do this week, but who cares about any of that? So let me just say it again. 15 years, $765 million American dollars. Our producer, Kevin Bendis, a Yankees fan, is devastated. He put himself on mute so we can't see his face right now. Things are so bad for him. Yankees fans everywhere are devastated. Jerseys are being burned. Gases are being sent into the environment. But tears in the Bronx are critical hydration in Queens, as I understand the boroughs of New York. Ben, it's time to ask the question. It's a lot of money. Is Juan Soto any good?
He is excellent. It is a mind-boggling amount of money, the highest average annual value ever, and the most years. So it's quite a thing when we're talking about escalators on top of a $765 million contract, and not to get to that total. It is significantly more than anyone predicted, even though everyone is well aware of how wonderful Juan Soto is, and we can discuss more why that is. I guess to keep the long story short, when you get a bunch of billionaires in a bidding war, Soto ends up making enough to come close to entering the 3-comma club himself. But you can see why Soto would be the one to command a massive contract if anyone was going to get one this big, considering his blend of youth and skill. He just turned 26 at the start of the World Series. He brings a perfect combination of contact, patience, power. He has always had this preternatural sense of the strike zone, this off-the-charts on-base ability. Fangraphs has a stat called OBP Plus, which compares a player's on-base ability to the league average during his era. Only Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, and Barry Bonds have higher career OBP plus marks than Soto. So that's two guys who played part or all of their careers pre-integration, and one who is notorious for steroid use. Of course, Soto has not had his decline phase yet, and the Mets hope that it won't start for a very long time. But even if we look only at OBP plus through Soto's age, it's just Williams, Ruth, and Frank Thomas ahead of him. He's durable, so not much in the way of injury concerns. And because he's so young, in theory, he has a whole Hall of Fame career ahead of him, on top of the roughly half a Hall of Fame career he's had to this point. So it's difficult to contemplate Juan Soto as a 40-year-old, which he will be. It's his age 30 season, 2039, the final season of this deal. But Dan Szymborski, who runs the ZiPS projection system for Fangraphs, ran the numbers for Soto over that span and found that he's expected to produce 65.8 wins above replacement over the course of that contract, which is exactly the amount that Hall of Famer Craig Biggio produced in his whole career, and is within one win of the career wars of Tim Raines, Robin Yount, Mark McGuire, Harmon Killebrew, Manny Ramirez, Edgar Martinez, and Tony Gwynn. So you're not just signing a future Hall of Famer and getting your cap on his plaque, you're buying a whole Hall of Fame career, and the Mets have never had a Hall of Fame position player. So between Francisco Lindor and Soto, they've given themselves a good chance of ending that drought.
Yet, Lindsay, what if I were to tell you that through their age 25 seasons, according to Baseball Reference, Aaron Judge, pretty good hitter, had accounted for 8 wins above replacement, whereas Juan Soto, through the same age, has accounted for 36.
That can't be real. I know it is, but the statistics that Soto accounts for are truly, nothing is actually worth $765 million. That's a made up number, and money is fake at that point. But it's truly incredible. And you can actually use numbers to justify this contract and to say that it wasn't a ridiculous overpay, which is silly because $765 million is just too much money. But I'm thrilled it's going to a player, as someone who was in DC when the Nats won the World Series and saw Soto play when he was young. It's exciting to see him reach this point. The fact that he turned down, what was it, a $440 million? Would you all turn down a $440 million offer? I just don't think, that just takes betting on yourself to a completely different level. But there's so much to talk about here. But really, Ben, I'm curious, the Yankees offered almost as much money and one more year. It was very, very close. And look, I lived in New York for 9 years. I also have existed in society and just know that the Yankees have so much more prestige than the Mets. I would go to a lot more Mets games when I was in New York because they were giving away tickets. It was ridiculous. So, and the Mets are just, they're the LOL Mets. They're the joke. They're the butt of the joke. Nothing good happens to them. So even though obviously things have changed with their ownership, it still seems just wild, as, an outsider, that anyone would actually choose the Mets over the Yankees when the money is almost the same.
Yeah, this came up on Saturday Night Live this past weekend when Marcelo Hernandez was playing Soto, and Dana Carvey was in the skit as well. And the joke was, why not spend your time and money helping the needy and the less fortunate? And Hernandez, as Soto says, you're right, maybe I sign with the Mets. But I don't think we can say that anymore about the Mets, because this is a different franchise under Steve Cohen than it was under the Wilpons. Now, they've still had their fair share of failure and lol Mets storylines, but they did just have a successful season and a successful turnaround and comeback and a deep playoff run. And you're right, I think it was expected that the Yankees, as the incumbent, and I know that things haven't gone well for incumbents worldwide lately, but given that he had a very successful season in New York, he seemed to enjoy playing with and being protected by Aaron Judge, they won a pennant. You'd think that the Yankees would be the leader in the clubhouse because he was in their clubhouse. And yet, if they had an edge here, it wasn't a huge one, because the Yankees came within the realm, at least, of matching this offer. It wasn't so far off. And at this point, you're playing with funny money. When you're talking about 750 plus million or 800 million or whatever it is, are you actually going to feel that difference as much as you're going to feel the difference in playing for one team over another? Now, maybe he just likes New York and, hey, he gets to stay in New York. But clearly there wasn't much of a pinstripe premium here for Soto, because it didn't take that much of a boost to lure him from the Bronx to Queens. So it is a big blow to Yankees fans' egos, even if they aren't what they were during the senior Steinbrenner days, when the Yankees were famous and infamous for blowing everyone else out of the water when they wanted someone. Hal Steinbrenner has been more measured than his dad was. And even so, when they have wanted the top guy, when they've gone after Garrett Cole, when Aaron Judge was a free agent, they got him. And in this case, they got outbid, and it stings even more because it's the Mets.
One of the outlier things about Steve Cohen is that where most of the professional sports outlier class sees it as uncouth or weird to spend the financial bonanza on top talent without getting a discount, it seems like Steve Cohen relishes it. He's so rich, even by the standards of Major League Baseball owners, that this is a dude who, when Francisco Lindor is in the midst of a great playoff run, will say, apparently within earshot of many reporters, that 341, as in 341 million, is looking pretty good right now, huh? Mm-hmm. Like most baseball owners, I think it's safe to say, including the Lerner family that controls the Washington Nationals, but really just about all of them, take pride in getting some kind of discount by signing a player earlier in his career before he's in free agency. And I just don't think Steve Cohen really cares. And without ascribing any moral virtue to Steve Cohen and how he has made his money in his career, that's what you want if you are a fan of a sports team.
It is. And of course, he's known as a fine, rare art collector, and he's spent $1 billion or more on that art collection. And not to objectify Soto, but him playing baseball is art, essentially. Watching him in the box, watching him take pitches, he's one of the rare hitters who seems like he's in command in the batter's box. Usually the batter is kind of on the defensive. Obviously, the whole game of failure saying is sort of overblown in my mind. A lot of sports are games of failure, but usually the batter does not succeed. And in Soto's case, you feel like he's always very much in it and kind of dictating the course of the plate appearance. And I think that Steve Cohen would probably prefer to spend less to put a contending and possibly championship caliber team on the field. He's talked about turning the Mets into Dodgers East and building them up into this player development powerhouse. And they have made strides in doing that. But to this point, he has had to reach into his extremely deep pockets to go get top players, and he's done it with Lindor and with people like Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, with varying returns. But in this case, he's going and getting the best player available. The Mets had the second oldest lineup in baseball this year, and adding a just-turned 26-year-old to that lineup, who's just going to be a stalwart and a staple for, you hope, a decade or more to come. That's about as big an upgrade as you can make in one move. And yeah, you made the comp to Judge. Judge debuted basically his first full season in the majors was his age 25 year. And that was Soto's season that he just concluded. The Yankees Rookie of the Year, the American League's Rookie of the Year this past season, Luis Gil, is older than Juan Soto. So even now we're doing Juan Soto is so young fun facts, which is why it is, again, sort of surreal to think of him being a 40-year-old person, as he will be when this deal is complete. But that's a long way away, and that's why he made so much.
I have a question. What is the significance of the fact that this deal has no deferred money? Because I was expecting deferred money to be a part of it, because it seems like it's a part of every big deal now. And of course, was a huge part of the Shohei Ohtani deal that made such waves last offseason of $700 million. But I guess I'm confused as to what's the significance and how did he get so much more money than Ohtani did?
Yeah, it seems like an incremental uptick going from $700 million for Ohtani to $765 for Soto, but the actual difference there is massively larger than that because the deferrals make Ohtani's net present value something like $460 million when he signed that contract. And that was itself a record. So to leapfrog Ohtani's by this amount is kind of shocking. Everyone knew that Soto was going to set a record here, but people thought it would be something in the range of maybe 600 million, 600 something. So he is the first $500 million man, let alone the first $700 million man, if you take into account the net present value. So I think it has something to do with the fact that he had a few big market teams in the running here with the Yankees and the Mets and egos at store and each of them really needing him. And the Red Sox were making competitive offers as well. And clearly that was just enough to dictate the difference here because the thing is, I mean, no one's better than Ohtani and obviously no one brings the off the field value that Ohtani does, but Soto is 4 years younger than Ohtani and 3 years younger than Ohtani was when he reached free agency last winter. And that might not sound like that huge a difference, but it is. That makes all the difference because you're talking about 3 more prime seasons and a less steep downward trajectory after that point. So probably the best comp would be Alex Rodriguez when he set his record deals decades ago. And the numbers look a lot smaller now, but if you take into account inflation and baseball specific inflation, those were absolutely massive deals that set new records by about the same margin that Soto has here. And if you look at the numbers, A-Rod was worth it in a sense, just in terms of the production he supplied. Now, the Rangers didn't really win with him, and they were kind of tapped out once they splurged on A-Rod. So I guess that's the key with the Mets and Steve Cohen. Is this going to max him out? It doesn't seem like anything will, probably, right? But because A-Rod was so young, even younger than Soto is now, that's the formula. That's the recipe for a contract that just blows everyone out of the water. And, you know, PD caveats aside, A-Rod was a better player than Soto because he was a valuable defender and base runner, whereas Soto is sort of one-dimensional. And there's the question of how long will he actually be in the field? What portion of this contract will he spend as a DH? How will he age? But there's just so much confidence in the offense and his eye at the plate not slipping, even if his other skills do, that alone was enough. And, you know, with any massive long-term deal, at the very end of that, probably you're going to be looking at the AAV and saying, oof, he's not worth this at this point, but you hope that he will be worth more than that to you at the beginning of the contract. And that'll even out and flags fly forever.
One of the reappraisals that I'm doing in my head right now is of the efforts that teams made to secure a long-term contract with him before this. Lindsay mentioned the $440 million offer that the Nationals made 2 seasons and change ago before they traded Juan Soto. Juan Soto did not accept that offer. Scott Boras, his agent, said that the late Padres owner, Peter Seidler, was working with him on an extension. And Boras says that it would have been done if the owner hadn't died. We'll never know if that's true. That might just be Boras being respectful to a beloved owner who's no longer with us. And obviously the Yankees tried really and didn't get it done. I think at least in the Nationals case, Ben, I looked back on the way that they allowed a World Series team to wilt over the years. And granted, some of this wilting started before they even won the World Series when they let Bryce Harper go to the Philadelphia Phillies. But not keeping Anthony Rendon, that turned out to be a good decision. Not keeping Trey Turner, that turned out to be a less good decision. and just watched the way that this all fell apart and said, well, they're not even trying. They're not trying to keep Juan Soto. It kind of looks now like Juan Soto understood his worth, and this was not a player you were going to get for a pre-free agency discount. Is that right? Or did he really take a risk and just win by betting on himself?
I think it's true that he was maybe not inclined to give much of a hometown discount, although in retrospect, I guess the Nationals could have upped that offer considerably and still had it be a discount over the contract that he ultimately signed. Although there's always some risk when you're signing a player years before free agency that they'll decline or get hurt or something in the interim. Soto has had a really unusual trajectory for an all-time great young player, in that he's already played for 3 teams and he's been traded multiple times. This will be his 4th team at age 26 for a guy who's at a inner circle Hall of Fame trajectory. That is not common, because usually when you get a guy like that, you hold on to him and you do whatever it takes to keep him. But yeah, it's this confluence of circumstances that have led to him moving around as much as he has. And I think the Nationals, they got a little unlucky because they won the 2019 World Series, and then they didn't really get to take the victory lap that a champion usually does because of the pandemic. So 2020, there's a shortened season, no fans in the stands. They didn't really get the big attendance boost and all the good feelings and extra revenue that come with a championship. So I think they got a raw deal timing-wise there, but it was still an unusually quick turnaround from champions to sellers. And now they're building back up again to the point that it actually looked like they would have made sense as a destination for Juan Soto right now, which would have been the funniest outcome to all of this if he had just gone back there. But ultimately, that was not to be. But it is really kind of amazing that he has had this number, and it's not just him. Obviously, he's getting the biggest headlines, but the free agent market has been really robust on the whole. Just about everyone who has signed so far has done so for more than was predicted, which is a little surprising given all of the unrest about broadcast revenues and the long-term financial health of the sport, which we've talked about with the cable bubble bursting and everything. There was some question about, well, would owners either cry poor or actually legitimately have less cash on hand to devote to this sort of deal? And based on what we've seen this winter, it doesn't seem as if there's a whole lot of fear that is tightening people's purse strings.
My understanding is that Juan Soto got wind that the Yankees still have not furnished a World Series ring to all of their 2009 baseball operations interns.
Yeah.
And he decided that he didn't want to be around an organization that treats Ben Lindbergh that way.
It's true. It does reflect poorly on the pinstripes.
That would be good. Yeah. I just want to say, I remember where I was when I found out about the A-Rod deal. For some reason, I can remember the living room. And so now I think I will always remember recording this podcast with you two lovely people and as marking this occasion. And, they had the same agent. So I feel like we got to give Scott Boras a shout out.
Yes. Scott Boras and his massive commission is the real winner here. He has some serious staying power, but yeah, it's very rare that someone comes along and reaches free agency like this, just because of the way that baseball economics work, where you have to put in 6 or 7 seasons before you qualify for free agency. And by that point, most players are 30 or older, and teams these days know how aging curves work. And if anything, they're harsher than they used to be, certainly during the PED era, which might give you pause here about a late 30s Juan Soto retaining his value. It's not the way that it was back when Barry Bonds was doing that, maybe for obvious reasons. And so when someone comes along like this, when it's Bonds, when he was a free agent leaving the Pirates, or A-Rod leaving the Mariners, or to some extent Ohtani leaving the Angels last year, then that's when you see the spending and the salary ceilings really, really raised to the roof.
I had so much fun talking about this generational athlete leaving his team that we'll do it again after the break. Vroom, vroom, vroom. It is the end of an era in Formula One racing. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. This holiday season, don't forget your number one fan, you. So what's a gift you could use? Maybe go to more home games, or even travel to some away games while rocking a new away team jersey. Well, here's something for you. Discover automatically doubles all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. With Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. That'll help with the swanky away jersey. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen. Alex Kirshner here with Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs. Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton were a Formula One dynamo together. From 2014 to 2021, Mercedes won 8 consecutive Constructors' Championships in the series, which has, of course, exploded in American popularity since roughly the end of that run. Hamilton won the Individual Drivers' World Championship in 6 of those 8 years and finished twice the other 2 years, both times dramatically so. Hamilton actually has a record 7 championships himself, as he also won the title in 2008 at McLaren. And Hamilton, a Brit, turns 40 next month, and he decided before this season that he would make a change after the year for what could be the final chapter of his career. Hamilton will go on to Ferrari, maybe the most famous name in motorsport, where he's going to pair with Charles Leclerc and try to bring the Tifosi, Ferrari's fans, their first championship since 2008. Hamilton evidently had lost faith in Mercedes after a lean few years, losing out badly to the dominant Red Bull team. And Red Bull's reign as the top team did end this year, but it was McLaren, the orange cars, rather than Ferrari's red ones, who emerged from this weekend's final Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi to win the team crown, the Constructors' Championship. Hamilton did win a race for the first time since 2021, but Mercedes finished all the way back in 4th, Hamilton 7th in the driver's standings. Hamilton's got tons of F1 records, not just the titles, but 105 wins, 84 with the same team, that being Mercedes. He and team principal Toto Wolff, the Austrian billionaire, have been the partnership in this sport for as long as many Americans have even been watching. Lindsay, what do you feel in your heart about Lewis Hamilton no longer driving for Mercedes?
Well, perhaps fitting for this past weekend and what was going on in pop culture truly was the end of an era. You know, it's going to be wild to see Lewis Hamilton with another team next year, but it feels right. It feels exciting. The way he finished this race, going from 16th to 4th, it felt like he's back on the ascendancy, and it feels like Ferrari is also really finding its groove towards the end of the season. McLaren, of course, was the winner this year, ending a 26-year drought, but Ferrari was challenging them. And so it just feels right for these two independently iconic brands to be teaming up, while F1 is, at least in America, arguably at the height of its popularity. And I really want to see Lewis Hamilton back contending, back in the top 3, top 1, really, winning another title. So Lewis Hamilton is bigger than F1 at this point. Ferrari is bigger than F1. So why don't we pair them together? And I thought the whole way that he and Mercedes both handled this last month or so, and the way they're going to handle the next few weeks of him kind of touring all the factories and meeting with everyone and kind of a goodbye tour of sorts, having meetings with those in Mercedes, it's special. It feels right to actually honor that, even though it has been a rocky year between the two, because, I mean, we've all said goodbye to someone and then had to walk a block, as you're walking together. That's essentially what this entire season was for Hamilton. But while I feel nostalgic about it, I feel invigorated by it too.
Yeah, I always think it's odd in F1 or racing sports when the upcoming departure is announced before the season, right? So you're aware it's not just a farewell tour to the sport, but to that team. Imagine if Juan Soto had signed with the Mets prior to his season with the Yankees. How would that go down, right? So Hamilton was really emotional, and he was doing donuts and shedding tears on the track. It felt almost like a retirement, like Rafa walking away. And I can see why, because it's not just like changing laundry, like Soto moving across town. This is a lifelong, a career-long association with this team and this machine that kind of keeps you safe, keeps you alive, right? You kind of become one with this car. I guess it's like a jockey with a horse, but it's not necessarily plug and play. I'll just take my talents to another team. Obviously, some of that transfers, but some of it is, your pit crew, your engineer, the way that you know that car works and that you've put your life on the line hundreds of times with this particular team and this particular machine. So I can see why it would be an emotional moment to move. Although Hamilton hasn't seemed particularly satisfied with how that machine has performed this season. And I guess that's the question. Is it the car or the driver? Because this was seen as sort of a coup when the transfer was announced, but then Hamilton had his worst season, right? And so the driver that he's replacing with Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, finished higher in the standings than Hamilton did this season with just as many wins and more podiums. And Hamilton turns 40 in less than a month. So we were just talking about Soto, and he and Hamilton started their professional careers around the same ages. And so much of the conversation about them earlier in their careers was how young and precocious they were. Well, now Hamilton is as old as Soto will be when Soto's unfathomably long contract is up. And given that he's coming off this decline, even though he finished strong in that last race, coming back from 16th to finish 4th, does he need a change of scenery and machinery, or is Ferrari getting the post-peak decline?
I think that it is awesome. It was one of the coolest sporting things that happened in this past year, that on a couple of weekends, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes were able to make things weird enough and be fast enough to put him back in P1 and to win races. The one that I will remember is the one at Silverstone in the British Grand Prix, where he enjoys the popular support of the crowd and is as beloved as any athlete has ever been anywhere. He was really emotional. And I think the fact that we knew that he was leaving Mercedes after the year made that considerably more special than any of his other achievements at Silverstone on that track. I also almost forgot that he won 2 weeks later as well in Belgium, which speaks to how much less emotional that was. But Ben, you talk about like what if Juan Soto had signed with the Mets before his last season with the Yankees. I do think the combination of that last year emotion and the fact that you could literally kill yourself if you mess up at this, at Belgium where he won, has had horrible incidents, fatalities recently at that track. Being able to like lock in like kind of this lion of F1 that he is, while also clearly being a bit of an emotional puddle all year at leaving this team where he was so successful, was quite a 1-2 step that I'm not sure any athlete has ever confronted exactly like he did. And he did it with grace, as he does pretty much everything with grace. He's a great sportsman in that way.
Yeah, it ended on a positive, sentimental note, one last hammer time. But as Lindsay alluded to, it can get awkward at times. It is like breaking up with someone and then continuing to cohabitate while one of you moves out and you're bumping against each other in the hallways and meeting up in the kitchen. And depending on how amicable the breakup is, that could be okay, or that could be a complete disaster. And this was not that, but obviously it was an up and down season for him personally and also for the team. But I guess it was mostly an up season for F1 as a whole, which we should probably discuss.
Yes, this was the year of F1 getting Lindsay a bit more interesting again. So after the amazing 2021 title race between Max Verstappen and Hamilton, which ended with Verstappen winning at this same Abu Dhabi Grand Prix under, let's just call it iffy pretenses. We don't have to relitigate the way that race was officiated all these years later. It became just a Red Bull Verstappen walk for 2022 and 2023. There had been new car regulations for 22, and Red Bull clearly nailed them in a way that their competition did not. But this year, the orange car at McLaren was the fastest car. And, perhaps Red Bull should have won the Constructors' Championship, didn't, because Max's teammate Checo Perez was not very good. But are we back, Lindsay, to having competitive, uncertain F1 in the way that we did when so many of us new fans were getting into it 3 years ago?
I certainly hope so. I mean, Verstappen did clinch the title in the second to last race, so that wasn't on the table in the last race, which is always a little bit of a disappointing. You want that photo finish, ideally, but it's absolutely good that I think Red Bull's dominance has ended, because dominance is great, but it's only great when it leads to more parity, right? It's kind of boring. We always forget that dominance and, dynasties are a little boring. It just leads to more excitement when they end. That's the cycle of sports and of greatness. So the fact that McLaren, which sounds like on the brink of going broke during COVID, it's actually where Hamilton started his career. It's important to remember, I think, that when he left McLaren for Mercedes, it was a lot of questions as to whether that was a good move. A lot of people thought that was kind of a career ender there. And McLaren's, of course, one of the iconic brands in the sport as well. But I love the stat that this is their first Constructors' Championship since 1998, which is before its current drivers, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, were even born. So that's been a literal lifetime since they have been on top of the sport. And like I mentioned earlier, you had Ferrari, which still had a shot to win the Constructors' Championship at the last race, although an outside shot. So I am all for getting to a point where things are more competitive, where it's not just Red Bull and the chasers. And I think that'll do a lot to sustain interest and continue to grow. And I think especially if you now have Hamilton and Ferrari actually challenging next year, it's just going to take everything to the complete next level.
Yeah, Verstappen won, but didn't run away with it or drive away with it the way he had the preceding two seasons. So it was the more competitive season, the most since 2021, though that's setting a fairly low bar. Yeah. And Red Bull didn't win the Constructors' Championship. So there was a sense any given week, any given race, that it was somewhat winnable, that Red Bull and McLaren and Ferrari and Mercedes were jockeying for first, for pole position, and it was kind of a legitimate, even if ultimately the standings, as Lindsay said, were settled before the end, and the very end was sort of a dud, and it was predetermined by that point. It was an improvement, because I think that it's helpful to have a dominant star the way that Verstappen has been, the way that Hamilton was before that, but it can also get to the point where it dampens enthusiasm because it just feels like no one else has a legitimate shot. So I think we got closer to the realm of it feeling like at least someone could sort of sniff the same area as Verstappen, and that helps. And, the popularity of F1 in the US obviously was just growing by leaps and bounds, and that exponential increase has slowed. It seems like the TV viewership, the ratings have plateaued. It certainly hasn't proved to be a fad the way that some people thought it might be when everyone was watching Drive to Survive and suddenly it was inescapable. It has kind of consolidated those gains, but maybe not necessarily built on them in this country. And I don't know what would have to happen for it to attain an even higher level, but maybe it is more competitiveness. I guess there's also the question of whether the season is too long, as Verstappen himself has said. And this is a conversation that's going on in a number of sports that we've had on this podcast about soccer and basketball. And sometimes it's a load management issue and wear and tear and fatigue on the players or the drivers. Sometimes it's more of a matter of audience interest and whether that will wane, because it just feels like, I don't know that I need another few races at this point. So I don't know whether either of you felt that fatigue or think that the schedule should be trimmed or that would make each race feel more meaningful, but this was a lap in the right direction.
I would like all sports to trim their seasons, please.
Yeah.
Every single one is too long and there are too many to watch. And as someone who is a generalist, there's too many to follow. And it would help me personally if everyone would shorten their seasons.
In 1960, there were 10 F1 races. That's just a random year that I picked. I believe in certain years there were fewer. There's nothing written in the clouds of motorsport that there have to be 25-ish races, close to 30 races in a year. It's not preordained, much in the way that it's not preordained that there are corporatized conference championship games in college football. These are things that just get made up by executives over a long period of time because it makes more money. So I don't know exactly what the optimal number of races is for F1, but I have no reason to trust F1's rulers that it is exactly where they are right now in terms of optimal for anything other than profit, which is not my concern.
Yeah.
I don't own F1.
Yeah. When you've got a growth stock or a growth sport, it can be very difficult to pump the brakes. I'm not necessarily reaching for driving imagery and language here, but somehow I keep landing on it. But it can be tough to exercise restraint at that point and say, yes, but we can actually help this increase continue and keep fanning the flames of fan interest here by limiting the supply and increasing the demand. There's always an impulse to say more, more, more. And then sometimes you end up in a situation where you've oversaturated the market and suddenly interest has waned. I don't know if we're there necessarily, but it's at least a conversation that has been happening.
Just to circle back to Hamilton for a minute, as we wrap this up, I just think it's important to note that it's so good that he still has the drive to compete at his age, 40, who can fathom 40, pushing 40. But, he's the sport's first Black driver, and he's worked so hard on increasing diversity, both in the driver's seat, but also in the sport in general, and put so much effort into that. And he's been such an outspoken voice for social issues. And he's worn, Arrest the Cops Who Killed Breonna Taylor t-shirts and spoken up for LGBTQ rights. And I just wanted that's just such a huge part of his legacy. It's a huge part of why he has transcended the sport in the way that he has. And I am so glad that as F1 continues to, become more and more in the mainstream, particularly here in the States, that his voice is staying in the mix.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate personally, not that you are by any stretch. I think we all want to guard against overstating any kind of activism in F1, which is probably the least progressive sport, maybe of them all, though we could have a draft, least progressive
NASCAR
sport.
would like a
F1,
word.
Yeah. F1 would be up there. It would be a high first round pick, certainly a lottery pick, given where and with whom it partners on a lot of its races. But I do think that Hamilton has made more efforts in the direction of making the world a better place than just about anybody who's come through F1, and that is commendable. And that puts more on the line for him than a lot of people put on the line in the department of trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah, the positional scarcity in our least woke league draft, or whatever we end up calling it, I guess that makes it even more valuable when no one's really speaking up. If someone does, even if it's a more muted volume than you might get in the WNBA or some more progressive league, then it stands out, and perhaps it helps shift the tide a tad.
Up next, we're going to talk about another big athlete contract, doing lots of that this week. Hockey goalies are strange beasts, and one of them is now so wealthy that he has signed a contract worth about 12% of what Juan Soto just had committed to him by the New York Mets. We'll be back. After a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. But with Z-Biotics, there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Also, Z-Biotics is continuing to invent probiotics that will help with everyday challenges of modern living. Go to zbiotics.com/hangup to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use hangup at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/hangup and use the code hangup at checkout for 15% off. This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Interest rates have fallen, but you can still lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com. That's a pretty big deal, because when rates drop, so can the interest you earn on your investment. A bond account allows you to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade corporate bonds. So while other people are watching their return shrink, you could be earning regular interest payments. But the yield is not locked in until you invest, so check it out. The good news is it only takes a couple of minutes to sign up at public.com. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account only at public.com/hangup. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosure/bond-account for more info. With my friends Lindsay Gibbs and Ben Lindbergh, I'm Alex Kirshner, still with you on Hang Up and Listen. 8 years and $92 million with a salary cap hit of $11.5 million a year. That's the new contract for New York Rangers netminder Igor Shesterkin, agreed between the parties last week. Shesterkin is about to turn 29 and is very, very good. He won the Vezina Trophy as the top goaltender in the National Hockey League in 2022. That season, he saved 45 goals above average to lead the league. That's a hockey saber metric that seeks to measure a goalie's performance based on the quality of the scoring chances against him. He consistently rates well in a wide range of goalie stats year after year, and pretty much everyone would agree that he is one of the best in the world. I say one of, because evaluating goalies is hard business. Connor Hellebuck of the Winnipeg Jets would definitely have something to say about anyone claiming that Shesterkin is the best. And really the goaltending stat leaderboards, both traditional and more advanced stats, are a muddle year after year. They're very transitory. The guy who leads the NHL in that goals saved to average stat this year, the Minnesota Wild's Philip Gustafsson, was plus 31.3 to average 2 years ago, but then gave up more goals than he would have been expected to give up in 2 of the prior 3 years. It's also a mental position where a goalie can lose the magic touch really quickly and never get it back. The Pittsburgh Penguins just gave a big contract to their goaltender Tristan Jarry a couple off seasons ago. Now he's bad enough that they sent him to the minor leagues for much of this season. It is hard to figure out goalies, but Ben Lindbergh, obviously the New York Rangers think they've figured it out well enough to give the biggest contract that has ever been given to the position. Do you think that they're right, that they might have a handle on just how good Igor Shesterkin is?
Yeah, it's a distant second when it comes to record contracts handed out by New York teams this week, but still noteworthy. And I think this is one of the most interesting analytical conundrums in sports, because the goalie is the most important player on the ice, and yet the hardest to value, and thus typically not the highest paid. We're talking about expansion drafts in our bonus segment today, and we also talked about the Mets. And I'm reminded of something that Mets manager Casey Stengel supposedly said at the 1961 expansion draft when the Mets selected a journeyman catcher named Hobie Landreth with their first pick. He said, "You have to have a catcher or you'll have a lot of passed balls." Similarly,
who can forget when he said that? Who can forget?
Yes, who can forget the late Hobie Landreth? But you have to have a goalie or you'll allow a lot of goals. And there are actually a lot of commonalities between catchers and goalies, not just the crouching and the masks and the pads and the almost pathological willingness to set aside self-preservation and put themselves in the path of hard, high-velocity projectiles, but another commonality is that it's tough to quantify their contributions because, again, the margins are not that great. If you look at sort of the standard stats, the save percentages, et cetera, between the top tier guys and the next tier down, and the samples just aren't big enough to discern the signal from the noise. Again, to bring it back to baseball, as I am sometimes prone to do it, it's almost like trying to identify a clutch hitter or a pitcher who's good at preventing hits on balls in play. People might know that those entities exist, but you just need such large samples to be able to tell because there's so much randomness inherent in all of this. And then there's the aspect of defense and that dictating goalie performance. And you have to sort of separate out goalie performance from defensive performance the way that you have to do with a pitcher and defense independent stats. So you just kind of look for who has the longest track record and the best track record, not just the longest. And over the 3+ regular length seasons since the COVID shortened seasons, Shesterkin's 94 goals saved above expected trail only Hellebuck's. So even though he is not having a particularly fantastic season right now, you can almost write that off because, well, a small sample on top of even smaller samples. I guess that's the silver lining about having a hard time judging goalies over the course of a career, is that one sort of slow start to a season won't sink your chances to land a record contract, because everyone recognizes that there's so much turnover and there's so much fluctuation in the results.
Yeah, it's a credit to the Rangers that they're not fazed by him having the worst season of his career. And they just say, goalies are weird. He'll figure it out. We'll pay him. I respect that way of doing business.
Yeah, it's just so interesting because the goalie statistics are just, as Ben is saying, it's so dependent on what the rest of the team is doing. I mean, these stats that we usually use that kind of normies like me can understand, of save percentage, goals against average, and wins. What the rest of the team is doing has so much to say about what those statistics mean, right? How do you really isolate those statistics from the performance overall of the defense and of the teams you're playing? And I imagine this must make it really hard to evaluate goalies too on the lower level and to kind of look at the development of goalies, because hockey is one of those sports that it is hard to watch when it is bad, like when it on the lower levels, the talent discrepancies and the resource discrepancies, of course, as well, just play such a difference. I know there aren't always statistics kept, period, even the bad statistics kept at the lower levels to give you a chance to look at development. So, I'm wondering how advanced statistics are trying to bring advanced stats, but it seems like hockey's a little bit behind on the advanced statistics train.
Yeah, and it's quickly caught up and certainly embraced that more. And, there's always some inherent difficulty with sport with continuous action and a lot of people on the field or the court or the ice at once and line changes and all of these complications. But it does seem like hockey sabermetrics have not necessarily cracked this nut, that this has remained a pretty thorny issue, even using the advanced stats. And, there are some trends that I think have made it even tougher to discern the standouts. I guess, offense has been down, not dead puck era levels, but it has bounced back a bit and save percentages are down. And then there's been a little more of the goalie by committee going on, which maybe in a sense makes it easier to identify the workhorses, the guys who are just out there playing most of every game, because, you do have more of a time sharing arrangement these days. And so I guess if you're someone who's out there all the time, maybe that makes you stand out a bit more. But it's not getting any easier to be a goalie. And again, it is a little like catchers in that it takes a while for goalies and catchers to get good. There's a high learning curve at that position. And then at the under end of things, you start to worry about how will they age, because of course reflexes and reaction time are so crucial. And if that slips, then maybe your performance slips too. And, goalie contracts have not always aged super well, both because of the age and because of the unpredictability. So again, the fact that Shesterkin is on the fairly young side as these things go, I think that helped him here. Not quite as much as it helped Soto, but sort of the same idea.
Lindsay, I do think you make a good point in your question about just the state of hockey analytics in general. I agree, Ben, that hockey has caught up, but I also think that if you walked into a Major League Baseball front office right now and talked about how RBIs or runs scored are the true measures of a ball player, you would obviously be laughed out of the building in 30 out of 30 Major League franchises. Whereas I do think hockey still has quite a bit more of an old-timey perspective represented in positions of power, which can have its benefits because, as we say, the sport has not succeeded in measuring every inch of itself the way that baseball has, but that can also lead to some dinosaur-like decision-making at certain junctures for certain teams. And I think the refreshing thing about the goalie conversation is that goalies are so weird that I don't know that anyone even pretends we figured them out. Like we talk about the GSAA stat, but I would bet that if I were to walk into an NHL front office and say that I had absolutely cracked it and shown them a broad suite of goalie sabermetrics, and now I totally understand the position, I too would be laughed out because I think people in hockey understand sort of the ephemera of the position and how inscrutable these people are who play it.
Yeah, it does seem like old school and new school are united in just a collective shoulder shrug. What do we do with these players? We absolutely need them, and yet they typically aren't the highest paid just because it's so hard to separate them from each other. And I guess one factor here in Shesterkin raising the bar is that it's a little less of a projected cap hit because you're going to get increases there. And so as a percentage of the cap spending, it's a little lower maybe than past expenditures have been. So maybe that helps with the willingness. But it is one of these sort of resetting the market for an entire position kind of deals. Almost the way that we talked about with running backs last week. It's not quite the same because goalies haven't fallen on hard times the way that running backs have, but sort of in the same way in that you have kind of an undervalued position, maybe, or at least a tough to value one. And then certain players seeing themselves as the people who are pushing this forward and are helping all of goalie kind. So I wonder whether there ever will be some sort of analytical revolution that helps answer this question, or if it's just entirely unresolvable. I think adding playoff performance helps, and you can do that with Shesterkin, and just it ups the sample. And it's also pretty important performance, and he has acquitted himself well in that kind of competition. But maybe greater sensitivity could help. Again, to bring it back to catchers, as no one was asking me to, there was sort of a new school revolution in catcher evaluation because suddenly there was motion tracking and pitch tracking technology that could quantify exactly where the ball went and how and where catchers received it and whether they were helping up the odds of a strike being called. And so suddenly, in recent years, the true value of catchers has been revealed, and the differences among catchers have been revealed because they're constantly touching the ball, and these slight subtle motions that we can actually track now reveal that, oh, this guy is providing actually a ton of value over the course of a season. So I wonder if there could be something potentially with shots, evaluating shot quality and exactly where those shots are going, and not just saying shots on goal, but, well, how good were the shots and what were the expectations? Yeah. Again, there's some amount of that going on, but could it get even more granular to the point where we could actually separate the best goalies and say, taking into account the actual attributes of that particular shot, how many goals would have been saved typically in that situation, and how much better did this guy do?
I think it could get more granular because I think that, for instance, the goal saved above average stat that we talk about is based on quality of the chance, like where the shot comes from, rather than the miles per hour of the shot or exactly where it was placed. I don't know that it distinguishes at all between a snipe to the corner and a shot that goes right into the goalie's logo. Maybe that is the new frontier. But I want to check you in case you're suggesting that Austin Hedges play goaltender in the NHL.
Yes, that might not be an easy transition, but it's funny. There has been some conversation. Some people have suggested goalies have gotten too big, that there's just a big goalie problem. Maybe people haven't talked about that quite as much lately, with scoring being a bit up, but the idea being that essentially, the Mighty Ducks strategy, just get a gigantic goalie. The net is only so large, you can just take up all that space, but it doesn't necessarily always work that way. And mobility and flexibility help a lot too. But all you can do really is just look at, well, who's, not necessarily leading all this goalie stats year after year, because there is just some inevitable volatility, but who's at least in the conversation, who's at the top of the leaderboard somewhere in the realm year after year after year. And you can just say, okay, well, even given the random variation, this guy has been among the best for several years running. Therefore, we can conclude that, no, he's actually quite good. So it's not the most sensitive evaluation you can do, but when someone like Shesterkin ends up having that sort of resume, then you're more comfortable committing to him on a contract like this. And especially if you're the Rangers, who need someone like that. And a lot of it is kind of team dependent. And again, defense adjustments could be another frontier where you can say, not just looking at to block shots and everything, but the quality of the shots there. If you're a team like the Rangers that is perceived to really depend on Shesterkin, then that's a different conversation than some other teams where you might say, well, we can sort of swap in anyone kind of competent and keep on trucking.
So I want to say that right after Shesterkin signed this record contract, his wife went into labor and she just had a baby yesterday and he missed the game and they gave up 7 goals and lost to the Kraken. So I am sure New York radio will be super calm and rational about everything, although hopefully the Soto contract will keep everybody occupied on other things. But congrats to
that again, I guess that demonstrates his value, right? He's irreplaceable.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Well, it's time for Afterballs, and one of the feats Juan Soto is famous for is hitting his first Major League home run before his big league debut. Allow me to explain. If you go to Soto's game log for 2018, his rookie year, the first game listed is a May 15th contest against the Yankees in which Soto pinch hit for Matt Adams in the 6th inning and hit a 2-run game-winning homer off of Chad Green, a fitting origin story for the future $765 million man, except for the fact that it wasn't his actual origin. That May 15th game began 5 days before Soto's promotion to the majors, but it was suspended when the rains came in the bottom of the 6th, so the final few innings were played on June 18th, by which time Soto was a regular in the Nationals lineup. And that's when he hit that homer, which was really his 6th in the majors. In Soto's real first game, on May 20th, 2018, he pinch hit in the 8th inning with the Nationals trailing the Dodgers, and he struck out swinging against one Eric Goeddel. Eric with a K, Goeddel. And I spell that name because you probably don't know it. Goeddel had just been picked up by the Dodgers on waivers a few days before. He was a roughly replacement level righty who made the minimum salary, totaled 141 innings for the Mets, Mariners, and Dodgers from 2014 to 18. Elbow issues seemingly ended his career after that year, so he was winding down as Soto was starting up. Goodell's brother, Tyler, was an even less distinguished big leaguer. Hey, you make the majors, you're special, but there's a gradation among the elite. Tyler Goeddel played part of one season for the Phillies, so neither of them made as much of a name for himself in his field or on the field as their father David, who abandoned his dream of becoming a competitive rock climber and instead became a molecular biologist who used genetic engineering to build bacteria that could create synthetic insulin, human growth hormone, and a protein called TPA that helps break down blood clots. So Eric Goeddel may not have saved as many lives as his dad, and he never saved a major league game, but he did strike out Juan Soto in Soto's first plate appearance, so he has that going for him, which is nice. Goodell's original nickname was Goody, which somehow evolved into the nickname Goopy, which is what he chose to be on the back of his jersey on Players Weekend in 2017. Asked to explain how he got to be Goopy, Goeddel said, "Guys just started saying it." So I'll start saying it too. Alex, what's your Goopy Goeddel?
Ben, great question. My Goopy Goeddel is about the college football playoff bracket reveal. The first bracket of the 12-team playoff era came out on Sunday. When the bracket saw the light of day, the SMU Mustangs were in it. The Alabama Crimson Tide were not. And this was a point of some controversy, though I think most people are generally happy about it. The tale of the tape between SMU and Alabama was interesting and lent itself to philosophical debates about what should really matter in this big old American enterprise of college football. SMU had just one loss in the regular season compared to Alabama's 3, though SMU added a second in a very close game in Saturday's ACC championship against Clemson, lost on a last-second field goal. Alabama plays in the SEC, SMU in the ACC, which means that the Tide played much better teams throughout the year, and their best wins over Georgia and South Carolina and Missouri are much better than SMU's best wins against, SMU's only losses, however, were to number 17 BYU and playoff-bound number 16 Clemson, which got an automatic bid. Alabama lost a game, for its part, by 21 points to a mediocre Oklahoma team that finished 6-6. So people were worried because they are always worried about the playoff selection committee and the SEC. And especially they're worried when the SEC team at issue is Alabama. Last year, a 12-1 Alabama made it over a 13-0 Florida State, which had an injured starting quarterback, and the playoff selection crew used that to justify taking a team with a loss over an undefeated power conference team that just had an injured quarterback. That was a really grievous slap in the face by the committee, not just at FSU, but at the idea that games on the field should actually matter. And here was a similar decision point again. Is Alabama better than SMU? Would you favor Alabama on a neutral field? If these two teams were pitted against each other, yes, you absolutely would. You got me. But it was important, I think, that SMU got this last at-large spot and Alabama didn't. There are 34 teams between the Big Ten and the SEC, and those leagues are always going to get the bulk of the playoff spots. They deserve some special deference for how hard they are, how many good teams are in them, and they get that deference. That's why Alabama was ahead, for instance, of 10-2 Miami, which had one fewer loss when the playoff committee ranked the teams. But at some point, losing more games has to matter, or the playoff committee threatens to extinguish the very thing that makes the 12-team playoff cool, which is the meaning it gives to more games. This sport has become extremely playoff-ified, I would say, where ESPN's coverage of college football at large and a lot of programs' behavior really is oriented around this specific 12-team tournament. Telling an 11-1, then 11-2 because of the conference championship game ACC team that they can't have a spot because there's a 9-3 SEC team in the wings would have diluted the meaning of so many future games played by teams in leagues like the ACC and the Big 12 if those teams are having a great season but are then told their only possible path to the playoff is if they can win a conference championship game, regardless of anything else we might know about their resume. College football rests on an illusion, I think, that everyone has a chance. They don't really. But the idea is really important to things mattering. If you think about how much less valuable things would feel if you knew for a cold, hard fact before kickoff that you really had no chance of playing for the ultimate prize. I think for a little bit longer, thanks to SMU being in the playoff in the final at-large spot, instead of Alabama with its 3 losses, more of us are going to be able to act like more games are important. And so much of college football's meaning in this country depends on that, whether it's an illusion or not. Pony up.
Neil Payne on his Substack created an alternative format that used only the CFP rankings to set the bracket, regardless of conference championship status. And he found that the number 5 and 6 seeds, Texas and Penn State, which supposedly have an easy draw because they play the lowest ranked first round opponents, followed by the weakest by earning conference champs, would actually benefit from a rankings only system because both of them would get buys and would have a chance to face Arizona State or Clemson in round 2. And he also found that the 12-team playoffs are right in the sweet spot of providing a balance between including the best team and not making it too likely that an upset will happen. And that historically there've been about a dozen deserving teams each year, and that this year's no exception despite all the upsets and surprises we've discussed. So ultimately, now that we know the field, that it's all set, and it was somewhat still up in the air the last time we talked about this, do you feel that it does accurately reflect what people would want to see from a 12-team field?
I think so. And I think the committee got it right. I think the field size is reasonably appropriate because there are only about 4 teams, maybe 5, that you could sell me could actually win this tournament, but I want to see them earn it. And I want to see Indiana play at Notre Dame in a first round playoff game under the lights in South Bend. Like, there are just things that I want to get to lay my eyes upon, even though I don't think, for instance, that Indiana can make a run and win the playoff. And so the spectacle of it all is going to be wonderful and unlike anything that we've ever had in this sport before. I'll be glued to my TV the weekend of December 20th.
My favorite was Nick Saban going on a long rant about how he doesn't hate the committee. He respects everyone, and he's not biased, of course, but strength of schedule should definitely be given more weight, and SEC is being disrespected. And I just like to say that another option would be to not lose 24-3 to Oklahoma. So that's always an option as well.
That is always an option. Strongly recommended if you can avoid doing it. That's all for this episode. We also have a bonus show that is live right now about the recent spate of expansion drafts in pro sports, most notably the one just this past week in the WNBA, and how sports leagues are reaching an evolved understanding of how to set up new teams for success or failure. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking try free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis, and again, as a Yankees fan, he's in a very bad mood today, so a review on Apple Podcasts would make him feel so much better. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thank you for listening. This holiday season, don't forget your number one fan, you. So what's a gift you could use? Maybe go to more home games, or even travel to some away games while rocking a new away team jersey. Well, here's something for you. Discover automatically doubles all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. With Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. That'll help with the swanky away jersey. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.